In this story, Jesus is the bridegroom, and while he's present in this world, it is a time of celebration because he is the fulfillment of their messianic prophecies. Now again, let me pause. I will pause and interject just briefly. The idea that Yeshua is the bridegroom and that Israel is the bride was a well-established theme by Yeshua's day, and the fact that Christian commentators in our modern time have picked up on that, I think, is accurate. I don't think it's wrong to interpret Yeshua's statement that way. I'm in full agreement with that. All right. The first part of the parable, if there's three parables, if we can list them as 1, 2, 3, the wedding feast one, I'm in 100% agreement that Yeshua is this, in fact, bridegroom that is implied in the parable itself. The only disagreement I would have would be Jewish commentators who don't accept Yeshua as the Messiah, right? So there would be my disagreement with Judaism as a religion. I think they've gone astray. They rejected Yeshua back in the first century as a whole. We know not every Jew rejected him, right? There were many thousands of Jews who believed that Yeshua was the Messiah, many of them actually priests. But nevertheless, it didn't stop Rabbinic Judaism from forming a religion very early on that was in contradistinction to everything Jesus had to offer, and in full rejection of Christianity, etc., etc. So we could say the beginning of the othering happened on the Jewish side of the house very early on, and the animosity, if you could describe it that way, between the two groups, Judaism and Christianity, right, as two competing religions, was a very, very early establishment, a very early occurrence in the very, very early stages of early Christianity and things like that. GotQuestions continues. They say Jesus himself said that he came to fulfill the law. Now notice they're going to start getting into their idea of replacement theology. Now they didn't use the word replacement here. They said Jesus said he came to fulfill the law. They didn't say that Jesus said he came to replace the law. I don't know of many pastors who would outright articulate it that way. But the idea of replacing the law of Moses with the law of Christ, the idea of replacing Judaism with Christianity, the idea of replacing the Jews with the church, etc., all of that is now firmly established in historic Christianity by our time. I mean, it had already begun forming its kind of seed beds very early on, with Marcion and the heretical statements that the Old Testament's no longer relevant and things like that. But GotQuestions says Jesus said that he came to fulfill the law. Now, in and of itself, that's an innocent statement that we could say is actually even equivocation, right? It's ambiguous enough because it hinges on that word fulfill. How do you interpret the word fulfill? Right, in his statement, and then their quote from Matthew 5:17. So the ambiguity or the equivocation of the word fulfill allows for Messianics to say, no, fulfill means that he would bring to its fullest expression and implementation, allowing us to actually do the law the proper way that it was intended to be done. That's how we interpret the word fulfill. However, if you're of the impression and interpretation that the law of Moses has been set aside and relaxed and be replaced by a new law, then the equivocation on the word fulfill allows you to spin it into a nuance that says fulfill means that it was prophesied that Jesus would come and bring it to its completion. That's what the word fulfill means for those of that particular camp. So just depends on the word fulfill and your interpretation of it, right? They conclude by saying, at least in this first paragraph, they say to continue fasting with Jesus present is akin to fasting and being mournful during a wedding celebration in which the groom is present. And again, leaving off on that note with that first example about the wedding, well, then it is apparent that Yeshua is trying to get those who question them to understand that, look at me, I am the reason to rejoice. I am the reason to turn your mourning into rejoicing, to turn your fasting into feasting. And again, since fasting, and I'm closing with this, since fasting in and of itself was something that was not really commanded in the Torah, to have Yeshua come and say, let's bring your tradition of fasting to an end. Not that fasting in and of itself was disobedient to the Torah. That's not what I'm trying to say. But the fact that Yeshua was trying to say, look, I'm introducing a new tradition, and it's based on my fulfillment of the fact that God, my Father, promised to bring to Israel their long-awaited Messiah. Well, take a look at me. Here I am, right? You've been waiting? Wait no longer. Here I am, right? Receive me. And therefore, let's stop fasting and mourning. Let's start feasting and rejoicing, right? Let's feast on the goodness of God's mercy and on the Father's faithfulness to his promises that he has brought the long-awaited Redeemer to Israel. Let's rejoice in that fact together, right? That's what Yeshua is trying to communicate. The kingdom of God is here. The kingdom is present. Let's rejoice. So we'll conclude our study tonight on that note. We'll pick this up next week with GotQuestions.org and finish looking at their own answer to this particular question. But that'll do it for examination of Matthew 9:14 through 17, Judaism v. Christianity.